Hey everyone, just letting you know that this video may contain spoilers for the books, comics, and games within the WarCraft franchise.
You have been prepared.
Greetings everyone, I'm the delicious and mythical Griffin Muffin, and I'm here today to review World of Warcraft, War of the Ancients Trilogy, Book 1, Well of Eternity, by Richard A. Knack. If you need some background information on this book is the first in the series of the War of the Ancients trilogy. The War of the Ancients in the Warcraft history actually occurs thousands of years before the current timeline in the video games, such as World of Warcraft. But the events of this book actually occurs after a book, say, such as World of Warcraft, Dawn of the Aspects, by Richard A. Knack. Same author. Yeah, so I'm gonna say straight up, not a fan of this book. Not a fan at all. It's readable. It is enjoyable, and it's nice to get into that world of the World of Warcraft, so to speak. Well, there's many aspects of why I could break down this book and let you know why I didn't like it and how it could improve and stuff like that. But one thing I do want to stipulate is the fact that if you like the book, that's totally fine. Everyone has their tastes. Everyone has what they like in literature and all that sort of stuff. It's just not my personal taste. This could be because the book I read before reading Well of Eternity was in fact The Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. So that could be a reason why. So let's talk about the characters, shall we? In this book we get characters such as Illidan Stormrage, Malfurion Stormrage, Tyrande Whisperwind, Ronan the Wizard, Varisa Windrunner, Coriel Straz the Dragon, Broxigar Saurfang. However, I find that although some of the characters in the games and other literature have been more prominently characterized, they're better characters in other stories. In this book in particular, it tries to pepper little bits of development with each character, but none of this development really goes anywhere special, if you know what I mean. And the development is, as I say, it tries to pepper throughout certain things of development with each character and stuff, but it's either a very scant explanation for a character just to get across certain character traits. I do find Coriel Straz, Crassus, to be a very interesting character. He reminds me of Tyrael from Diablo 2, kind of, you know, this larger-than-life immortal being who feels the responsibility of looking after mortals, weighs on his shoulders alone. I like that sort of character. And the only real sort of change we see in the characters throughout this particular story is the fact that two of them become more powerful, which I'll explain later. But also, to be fair, we also get some development with Broxigar, and we start to understand why he fights with Malfurion and all that sort of stuff throughout this book, so that was pretty cool. In terms of the villains of this book, the villains are Lord Xavius, High Counselor Xavius, or whatever his title was, I can't remember right now, and then Queen Azshara, who are plotting to bring the Legion into the world. Well, more specifically, they're trying to bring Sargeras into the world. It's a very typical sort of dynamic. I mean, it's the evil counselor whispering into the king or queen's ear. It's kind of the same thing that's been done in many iterations of medieval fantasy, and it's kind of like nothing new, you know? I found Lord Xavius to be, I think, if you get my meaning, the only thing missing from him was a mustache for him to twirl. He's just like, I'm evil, we shall bring Sargeras into the world and everything will be all good. I mean, yeah, Queen Azshara is a little bit more interesting than Xavius. I mean, she's really caught up in her own world, and she's so disconnected. I kind of like that about her, actually, thinking about it. You know, she's very disconnected, and she's very much like, I am the most powerful, and I am the most superior. And it kind of sets it up for, you know, her to be brought down by her own hubris. And that's a cool thing, I guess. So let's get down to themes and impressions, right? Let's talk about what this book is kind of all about. There's not a lot that this book really tries to communicate. You know, it's just a cool story about how, you know, the Night Elves fought back the Legion, all those years ago. You don't really walk away with anything like, oh man, remember that bit. There are a few bits which I'll mention, but yeah, we'll do that a bit later. I mean, there's hints of you know, unifying for the greater good, which is a thing that's always been in WarCraft, really. I mean, that's just a given. And there's also stuff to do with, you know, challenge the status quo when it comes down to Malfurion and Queen Azshara and stuff like that. As I mentioned before, some of the themes that are in this story are kind of abundant throughout all the WarCraft stories. For Malfurion, they kind of, the writer tries to kind of create this, you know, he's got a destiny to achieve, which if you enter the book with the knowledge of the games, you know that Malfurion becomes this great powerful archdruid, or druid, or whatever you want to deem him as. Like, we're gonna see that eventually, so we're on that journey with him, which is all good and all, because we have that also for, if you play the WarCraft 3, we're centered, in the Orc campaign for example, we're centered on Thrall and his journey to achieve greatness and achieve his destiny and everything like this. And that's really cool, because we, especially in the RTS campaign, we see his gradual steps to achieving that. We see the obstacles that get in his way and how he overcomes them. And that's really inspiring, you know? That's the whole point of these sort of journeys, is that we become inspired. But with Malfurion's journey, he just kind of gradually increases in power, slowly understanding what the power of the forest is. And so if you don't know, don't worry, it's just on the blurb on the back, so I'm not really spoiling. But the Legion, or agents of the Legion, actually come back and cause a bit of a ruckus in the past, so to speak, all because Xavius and Azshara have been communicating with Sargeras. See, the Legion, I don't know, they're not entirely, they're a specific type of villain, in my opinion, that is, that they have to be used correctly, so to speak. There are certain types of archetypes. There are certain archetypes of villains. There's the one that kind of does what he does because he believes in a greater good, which could maybe apply to people like Illidan in the later games. There's a villain who is outright evil. It's just, you know, we have, you know, the big ball of evil. That's just this that's this conglomeration of all these sins and evil in the universe and stuff like that, which could, you know, go to people like Deathwing and maybe the Old Gods, but the Old Gods is, I don't know, not exactly that. There's one sort of archetype of villain which, if I was to name it right now, would be the army villain, which is, you know, the horde villain or whatever, you know, just this horde of really nasty people that are gonna come in, or they're controlled by a particular other villain, and they're gonna wipe out, and they're a big threat for that reason. Now, see, the thing is, the Legion in WarCraft 3, when they were introduced at the end of the Undead campaign, that was a big step up. That was like, whoa, this is really weird. What happens to the Undead? It turned the scales a bit. It changed things, you know. Okay, there's these new players here. Well, how are we going to stop this, you know? But in this story, the Legion's used as an outright threat. It's just like, okay, the Legion's coming and it's going to destroy the world. This also runs into a problem with the book, where it's a prequel. Now, for example, in Rogue One, I've watched it a couple of times. I do like the film. You know that they pass off the Death Star plans. You know that because you watched A New Hope. So when you read this book and you kind of go, okay, well, I know that they're all good because I play the games and nothing's happened there. So obviously they're defeated. Otherwise, why would this be an issue? In Rogue One, what they do is they change it up. They go, how is this going to happen? All right, how do they get the Death Star plans out? And like at every moment was like, oh no, the Death Star plans were dropped, and how do they get to there? You know, that built suspense that way. But in this, it's just like the Legion comes and it's like, oh, they find the power of teamwork and friendship and defeat them and push them back. It's like, okay, tops. I think one thing I can talk about now is the writing style of the book. Again, I'll mention how you know, my last book I read was Sword of Destiny. And I enter this and it's very bland. There's not a lot of flourish to the writing. It's just not a very wide use of vocabulary. I'm not saying like, oh, yes, you need to use big words to make it interesting. No, you don't need big words to make it interesting. You just need to use the words efficiently. I could think of a few things to, you know, kind of describe why I didn't like the writing style. And this could be my own personal taste again. If you liked the style, I'm actually curious as to how you found it good. You know, maybe it might change my perspective a little bit. So feel free to comment down below, but don't be a dick about it. One thing that plagued the beginning of the book so much, and it just made me just rage really hard, was just this unnecessary amounts of exposition. I'm talking like exposition like just spinning a yarn about this character, and I'm like, why don't we actually do something where dialogue reveals this, you know? The writer has to go back and describe why Ronan doesn't like the Legion, and he talks about the events of WarCraft 2 that he was in, and well, the second war that he was in, and stuff like that. But also, it was just like, come on, get going with this. What's going on, you know? And then there was a bit where, like, the nanny comes in and looks after Verisa, and they give her, like, a paragraph of what her fucking story was. And I was like, I don't fucking care about the nanny, man. I want to get on with the story. And then eventually it does, and it's like Crassus, like, telepathically communicates with Ronan. It's like, I need you. Come to me at once. And it's like, okay, so that's how this story begins. Great. Oh, and like characters teleport everywhere a lot. Like, when one part of the plot isn't going anywhere, it's just like there's a Deus Ex Machina where, like, you know, they'll be like, oh, and then they're suddenly transported somewhere, and they wake up like, oh, where am I? Like, there's a bit where, when Crassus and Ronan first teleport into this Night Elf forest, you know, they're carrying Ronan and Crassus back on their mounts, like the Night Elf guards, and they get waylaid by treants, I think. Vines pull Crassus and Ronan off, and it just magically pulls them through the entire forest into a glade, which is surrounded by flowers that spew sleep powder, so they can't leave. And there's an anti-magic field there, which Cenarius has put up. And I'm like, Cenarius, if you could put anti-magic shit just in your little glade, why don't we put it in, like, Queen Azshara's, like, little castle. Use this anti-magic stuff more, is what I'm saying. And when you introduce that into a medieval fantasy, it's like, okay, this anti-magic stuff can just be everywhere, right? I mean, I don't know. I personally don't like the use of anti-magic MacGuffins. Hey, so just a couple of things I wanted to add to this part of the review is talking more about what I actually didn't like regarding the writing style. So one thing that drove me nuts with the writing style was the poor use of similes. Maybe it's just a personal thing, but I think the way that he used similes were very poorly used. They often weren't very descriptive, or it kind of jarred the sentence or paragraph or whatever you were reading at the time, and it kind of just threw me off quite often. All the combat sections in this is really kind of boring. Certain writers are able to implement certain pacing techniques and certain words and certain onomatopoeia to describe how a fight sequence goes down. And this guy, Richard A. Knack, really doesn't hit the mark with a lot of it, and I really wasn't in the mood for reading any of his combat stuff. Thirdly, one thing I don't like is the writer made magic and spellcasting very bland and boring. There just wasn't any excitement whenever a spell was cast. It was just, for example, would be stuff like, he threw out his hands and an ice beam formed. It's like, really? Describe a bit more, man. Like, he felt the energy rise up within him. Fuck, I could write a better sequence for spellcasting more than this, you know? It's just such a shame. So one thing I did like was the subplot with Crassus and Coriolstraz. Well, they're the same person, but Crassus goes back in time as his humanoid form, and Coriolstraz is actually still existing in that time. Eventually, these two meet up, the Red Dragon form and Crassus, and Crassus is there, and he's like, alright, so I better inform these guys of the Legion and tell them what a great threat they are and everything. And during the meeting, Neltharion's there, which is Deathwing, before he goes all crazy. But one thing it reveals in this little meeting is that Neltharion has actually already gone mad and he's actually plotting stuff. He lets Crassus know about this telepathically, and he actually makes him go mad, like makes him just start spitting gibberish and going absolutely nuts. And to me, that was really cool and really made Deathwing, well, Neltharion, actually more of an interesting villain, because he's actually holding back his madness until the time is right. That's cool, in my opinion, you know, and I was waiting to see if anything would develop with that, and I do know the rest of the story of the War of the Ancients, so he does eventually just go, "Bah, I'm evil!" But I'm waiting to see what happens there, and that would probably make me read the rest of the books. Now, so far you may think that, Griffin Muffin, you hate this book. I'm like, I will never say I hate this book. I will say that it just wasn't my cup of tea, and I really don't see myself reading this again anytime soon. I did enjoy certain bits. In particular, the bit where Broxigar is in a cage, and Tyrande goes to see how he is and stuff like this, and he's like, oh, you alright and everything? But Broxigar reaches out to Tyrande, and Illidan burns the cage and burns his hand. He's like, oh, don't touch Tyrande. And Tyrande turns to Illidan and goes, why'd you do that? Don't do that. He's just a poor being in a cage. That's fucked up. Don't do that. And Illidan's like, I thought he was gonna hurt you and everything. A lot of WoW YouTubers have pointed this out. That was actually a very important point, because that was when Tyrande started to kind of go, no, Illidan, you're a bit of a dick. So started looking towards Malfurion as her future husband and stuff like that. And then it caused Illidan to get really angry at Broxigar and be like, fucking orcs, and ignite that hatred towards orcs and the Horde and stuff like that. So it was a really interesting point. It was actually very well written, that bit, because you actually saw the characters interacting, and you saw Illidan's, brashness and Tyrande's kind spirit, and then Broxigar, who you saw Broxigar's like soft side, like the fact that he's being held in this cage, but he's not just a monster, It was good. It was a good scene, and I really liked it. But that was pretty much like the pinnacle of character interaction in this book, in my opinion. So just to wrap up this review, I'm going to talk about how this book ends. So obviously there's spoilers ahead, if you still want to read it. So as we reach the climax of the book, we're starting to get steps such as the Well of Eternity gets cut off from the rest of the Night Elves, Crassus gets a vision from Nosdormu to go find Malfurion, but then on top of that, Malfurion forms the idea that to stop Queen Azshara and Lord Xavius from whatever they're doing in the castle, he sneaks in there in his dream form. He goes into the Emerald Dream and sneaks into the palace and attempts to shut down the portal, but Lord Xavius sees him and captures him in a soul crystal, and he's seemingly trapped there forever, until Tyrande just goes, please, Malfurion, come back to me. So, with the power of boners, he comes back, but then he has just missing a little bit of power, so Crassus rocks up and is like, here, have my power. And then he's able to, break out of the soul crystal, and he has all this power, from Crassus, and he starts to reach out across the world, and he can feel every stone. He can feel all the leaves in the trees and all the air and all this, and then just summons this massive cyclone and just destroys the palace, and along with it destroys the portal that Sargeras was going to come through. Sargeras whispers to him saying, you have prevented nothing and everything, and Malfurion's like, we will be ready for you. And he wakes up and everyone's like, great work, team, let's prepare for the next Legion invasion. And the book ends. Meh. I tried to really look at this book and be like, what's it really trying to get across? Is there anything in it that's super interesting or anything like that? And yeah, it's just a cool story to read, really. And at the end of the day, I did enjoy the book, so to speak. I mean, I will admit the beginning part of the book actually had me pulling my hair out, come on, get on with the story. But other than that, when it picked up some speed, I was like, yeah, it's a good story. Get to see some of my favorite characters and stuff. It's cool. But overall, guys, I give this book 1.5 muffins. So the one muffin that it gets is the fact that it was overall enjoyable. It was nice to read, and at some points it really got good, and then it just kind of went back down, but then it got back up. And then I think about the interesting points in it. The fact that there was a couple of good bits that I really liked, and I thought they were really pertain to the character development and stuff, but I gave it half a muffin because it's very scarce. It's a couple bits where it's super awesome and then it's gone. But for me recently, I decided I'm thinking of doing more lore-based stuff for the channel. I've decided to go into more of the WarCraft books and stuff, and I thought, that there's a lot of talk about this one, so I thought I'd get into it, and I have, and yeah, you don't need to read this one to really be informed of the lore. I personally think that people like Crucial, Noble 87, they do really good jobs of condensing the lore that's in that book and then representing it in a far more interesting way. Which is that bad? Is that a bad thing? Is that a bad thing for the writer? So more importantly, guys, what did you think of it? I'm not gonna bash you if you liked it or hated it or whatever. I just want to know. I just want to know what the general opinion is of people with this book. So, thanks. Like, comment, subscribe. Do all that lovely stuff down below. If you're feeling awesome today, feel free to chuck in a buck over on my Patreon. Be sure to share this video with your mates, and I'll catch you later.